last episode we spoke about the idea of bacteria adapting to antibiotics, right? So my question is, why do evolutionists use this mechanism as proof of evolution, and how else would you explain it?
Okay, so when you're looking at the theory of evolution, you have this problem that the mechanisms of the theory are not observable. It means that if I claim to you that this creature has had that specific ancestor through so many generations that took millions of years, it morphed into a different ancestor, you can tell me that this is not observable and I need to deliver better evidence than just what I'm saying. All right? So bacteria has very nice features. So you can grow bacteria easily. They reproduce in huge numbers. And the generation length, in terms of time, is very short. Okay? So you can have a bacteria that splits or divides in few minutes. So you have first generation, second, within a few hours or few days, you can have thousands of generations in an observable time frame. So you have this thing called model organisms, and one of them is some types of bacteria which satisfy these criteria. You can grow them in a lab, you can observe many generations, and then you can see if there are changes within the generations. The second thing is that we all use antibiotics, and we already notice, it is observable, that when you use a kind of antibiotic, after some time, the antibiotic is not effective anymore. So, given this observation, evolutionists say that this is very clear proof of what we are claiming, because what does the antibiotic do to the bacteria? The antibiotic kills or disables the bacteria. And this is a very clear and a very obvious pressure or challenge to that organism. Stress to that organism. And what does the theory say is that under those challenges, natural selection will come to pick the creatures that had the mutations that make them more fit to the environment. So you have this idea of so many random mutations, and those random mutations, if they are harmful, they go away. If they are neutral, maybe nobody notices. They can stay dormant for some time until they are needed or expressed, or they might be beneficial. So if you are exposing bacteria to a chemical that is killing them, so when those mutations are taking place, if a bacteria develops a mutation that is beneficial in terms of not being affected by that bacteria, by that antibiotic, natural selection will mean that this one strain of the bacteria will multiply, the others will die, it will become dominant, and hence you have a new form or species or version of this bacteria emerging. And then they claim that this is evolution in action. And since it is a common observation that we see...
I just want to say that it's still bacteria, right? It hasn't morphed into any other...
Obviously, it's still bacteria. But then they will say, don't ask for the impossible, because we have shown you something, okay? That the question is, if you look at the definition of evolution that somebody like me will not agree upon, and many creationists will not agree upon, because we have talked about language and linguistic tricks before. Because there is no problem with adaptation, there is no problem with the change in frequency of alleles in a reproductive population, because those changes in alleles can be due to just inheritance or just breeding or just adaptive responses, etc., like the many examples that we have discussed. The problem is when we are talking about descent with modification, where the primary mechanism that is in play is the random mutation plus natural selection. So descent with modification through random mutation and natural selection is the primary objection of creationists to the evolutionary theory, or to people who are scrutinizing the evolutionary theory. Because nobody is criticizing inheritance or breeding or adaptation. So if you look at this thing, they will use it to say, this is an example to show that random mutations and natural selection are potent. They can deliver results. So now the question, if this is whether this is true or not. Right? So let's look at what is really happening to see if it is true or not. On the ground, what is happening is that you have the antibiotic. The antibiotic is killing or disabling bacteria in one way or the other. But then you notice that the antibiotic, when it comes new to the market, it's working, and then after some time, it is not as effective. Especially with the people who are using or abusing it. Okay, if it's being used or abused in a specific environment, yes, you will find that it's not as effective after some time. Then you will need maybe to change to a different one, etc. So what's happening? So number one, remember the E. coli experiment that we talked about, the one about the citrate? And in this experiment, it's also known as the Linsky experiment, because the researcher who did it was Richard Linsky. So in this experiment, he put the E. coli under an environment where they are deprived from a main food source that they like, which is glucose, and then after some time he noticed that the E. coli is starting to use citrate. And we explained that this was not a mutation. After the big festivals, it was discovered that the citrate machinery and all the code needed for citrate was there, but it's typically turned off. And under that stress condition, there was this promoter that when the bacteria was in an environment where less and less oxygen was there, the promoter is turned off in the presence of oxygen. So in the lack of oxygen, it became turned on, and then the part of the code that enables the bacteria to take citrate in was moved with the part of the code that enables the bacteria to take the glucose in, and now the bacteria is taking citrate in, transporting citrate in from the environment and using it, and flourishes on citrate. And it was a very big disappointment that this was eventually the result, because there was no mutation. All what happened is that there was this marvelously engineered mechanism so that the bacteria would survive. So, what is happening with the antibiotics? Now, bacteria, as we talked before, is a very versatile creature. And it is amazing that God creates this creature, and it has in its limited genome all those programs for fighting toxic materials that can kill it. Antibiotics. So antibiotics are called antibiotics because they are anti this biological organism, which is the bacteria. And it occurs that the programs or the code that fights or disables the action of the antibiotics is distributed over the different strains of bacteria. So you have, for example, so many human beings, and you have this talent. You are good you have a good imagination, you can do architectural designs that are very nice. Somebody else has a talent in gymnastics, somebody else has. So the traits or what is expressed in our different genes, or what the genes that we have are different in a big population. So if we become in an environment where people who are very talented in civil work, for example, are needed because it's the time of building the cities and rebuilding our civilization, those guys get well off. So this is what happens actually. What was discovered is that a primary reason for the antibiotic resistance is that the bacteria already has in its genome the programs. Bacteria already has in its genome the programs for counteracting the bacteria, the antibiotics. And there is this other mechanism which is called horizontal gene transfer. So bacteria in one place, and this is something that you can ponder upon. So let's imagine that in this environment where people who have, for example, very good eye vision, you can give me this feature. You're able to transfer. You send me on a message this program, and I download this program to my genome, and suddenly I can see better, or I can see in the dark, or I can run faster, or I can have better mathematical skills. So the bacteria have this amazing thing.
Technically, we can do this, but it's not quite how you describe it.
We learn.
No, I was going to say that through things like surgery and through things like we have our own ways of giving abilities. It's not quite. Yeah.
We transfer skills or we use tools, etc. But
and education, of course. Like
yes, but those creatures, they can actually, literally transfer the code. Amazing. So they produce those particles called plasmids, and on the plasmid they will put a part of their DNA that is ring-shaped, and one bacteria will be emanating plasmids, and those plasmids will be absorbed by the surrounding bacteria, and they integrate it into their genes. And how this works is that if you are, for example, now a bacteria that is, or a person who is living in a nomadic place, a desert, and there aren't so much need for building skyscrapers, okay? People who are interested in being civil engineers are not that much.
They're not going to flourish.
They're not going to flourish, yeah. So people will not really go and be very enthusiastic about acquiring these skills. The bacteria reproduces very fast. So when there is this newly introduced antibiotic, that specific gene that is beneficial to fight this antibiotic is not very popular. Not everybody needs it. But some of the bacteria have it. And when they are spreading it out in plasmids, those who take it and those who do not take it, there is no differential advantage. So it is not being magnified due to the stress. Okay? When the antibiotic comes into play, the ones who do not have it will perish very fast.
So everybody runs for it.
They will make way for the ones who have it. And the ones who have it will distribute it. More. And those who do not capture it will die, and those who capture it will flourish, and those are the ones who are going to split. So after some time, everybody in that environment who survives has it. The cat day. Yeah, cats and kids. Okay, so what does this tell us? Number one, there is no mutation whatsoever. The bacteria just has this arsenal of antibiotic equipment.
Survival mechanisms, yeah.
Yes, but they are. If humans had those features, we would be invincible, right?
Our brain,
but God gives us something else, that we have the brain, so we can, if there is a bacteria or something, we can develop personal protection equipment, or we can develop drugs, etc. But those guys, they do not have labs, and they will not go and invent things. So they are created with this creature is engineered or created to survive. It is essential for the continuity of life on this planet. So it has, from the person who created them, which is God, obviously, in our perspective, it has all what it needs to fight whatever you are going to think to get rid of it. And it also has this mechanism that makes this bacteria that has 2 or 3 mechanisms share it with others, and not everybody gets it, but when the others who do not get it are eliminated, those who have it will stay.
And they split so fast.
And they split fast, so even if you start by a population of 1 million bacteria and only 5,000 have it, you will have 985,000 die, and the 5,000 will remain, but those 5,000 will become 1 million in very short time. Now, maybe the person who takes the bacteria, the antibiotic, has none of the 5,000, but somebody else has, and this somebody else will be cured because you will get rid of the majority of the 1 million bacteria that were bugging him. But then those 5,000 the next time are the dominant, and if you keep on taking this one, it will not harm them anymore. So what this tells us is that there is no mutation that is causing antibiotic resistance. Well, you might then ask and tell me, prove it. How do you know that this is something that was there all the time? And the lesson learned from this, to me, is that one should not rush to believe any of the evolutionary claims, because they put claim after claim. You make a rebuttal for the claim, and then they put forward another claim. And the claim looks, because there is an observation that is supporting it, looks to have virtue. But the whole truth about evolution is that it does not make sense. Randomness cannot generate order. No purpose cannot generate something that functions very suited to its environment. Yeah. So this whole thing doesn't make sense. So we have to be very cautious. So what happened, so that I'm saying this, is that those couple of scientists were on a mission in Antarctica, and they got stuck there and they died and they were frozen. And this was in the 1800s, so quite before antibiotics were all around and generating this antibiotic resistance thing. And then their bodies were recovered lately. And on an autopsy, somebody thought, let's see what kind of bacteria those guys had more than 100 years ago. And they found that the bacteria that was in their intestine, in their gut, was resistant to the antibiotics that we have today. Even though they were never exposed. So it says, it is a positive confirmation that it is not the exposure to the antibiotics that then gets combined by random mutations that is developing this continuously innovative resistance to antibiotics. So you have this observation that antibiotics develop resistance. Somebody is claiming that it's developing resistance because while you are applying the antibiotic, mutations are happening, and some of those mutations are creating the antidote for the bacteria, which turns out to be completely false. However, the researchers who believe in evolution, they have this kind of persistence. So they do this kind of extra work. So they get a bacteria, And they know that this bacteria does not have the gene that will fight that specific kind of antibiotic. And they start culturing it. And they start giving it the antibiotic. And many generations down the line, guess what? The bacteria starts resisting the antibiotic. And then they say, look, so the matter of horizontal gene transfer and the plasmids and what we have described is not only what is happening. That bacteria had no gene in its bag of tools. However, after some time, it is resisting the antibiotic. And when things like these happen, they do all the festivals and the noise, etc. And then it turns out like this. It's quite funny. So let me, for example, give you this example. Because all the logical thinking says that a mutation, which is a copying error in the genetic material, a damage in the genetic material, needs to be harmful. This is what logic says. So it turned out that the following is happening. But let me give you this example. Let me give you this parable. Okay? Let's assume that there are those aliens who come and invade Earth and they control the minds of people through an auditory signal. Okay? They send a specific kind of sound wave, maybe that is not very... they send a specific kind of sound wave, and then when you hear this sound, they control your mind. Let's assume that this is a scenario. So who are the guys who will survive?
The deaf ones.
The deaf ones. So suddenly, everybody is walking like a zombie in the street, and the deaf ones don't know what on earth is happening, and they're trying to wake the other guys up. Okay? So now, those guys become zombies. The majority of population becomes zombies, and the deaf guys are free, and they reproduce, and you have a new population of humans that are deaf. But under this environment, those guys are very well. And then the aliens know what's happening. They do not know why those guys are not affected, but when they capture one of them and they study him, they find that he is deaf. So they now start using visual effects. Okay? And then the blind survive. So now we have humans who are deaf and blind, but they're with the walking stick or something, and they are the ones who are reproducing, and they build new human cities that are deaf and blind. All right, and then the aliens get smarter, and they send those guys are reading now with braille kind of thing, and they encode things so that by the touch you can get hypnotized, and then the guys who do not read and write become the dominant. Okay.
So it's always a disadvantage to allow you to survive.
It's a disadvantage. So you build this antibiotic that, for example, targets the bacteria through this marker, or through this, they hook to the bacteria through this protein, or through this function. Okay?
Which if you don't have, you can't.
Yeah, and the bacteria is there, and there are some disabled bacteria. Or due to a mutation, okay, somebody is born, like the one is born deaf or blind, some bacteria are defective.
Missing an organ or something.
And the bacteria that are defective, they are still harmful, they still cause you the disease, but they are defective. Alright? So what happens, funnily enough, when you discover this, is this evolution? Is this kind of degradation in an organism that gives the organism a circumstantial advantage in a specific situation? Because what happens if the aliens get bored of this planet Earth, or they cause it to be very polluted and leave? And then humans wake up again. Are the deaf and blind who cannot read and write, which were the kings of the planet, okay, because they cannot be hypnotized, going to remain the dominant? they are immediately going to be back to their disadvantaged situation, where the people who are not deaf, not blind, and can read and write will become the dominant again. So this is not evolution in terms of getting way better suited to your environment. And this is not innovation. This is destruction of information, which is exactly what mutations does. So the lesson learned from this thing, number one, there is no bacterial evolution that is causing antibiotic resistance. It is either the feature was there, but embedded in a piece of the genetic code that gets triggered under specific conditions, like the citrate experiment that we have discussed in part 2. Or the feature is there all the time, and the bacteria are exchanging it all the time, and when this feature becomes so important, the ones who have it and the ones who accept it from the plasmid exchange are the ones that are going to flourish. Or, essentially, even if they don't have it and the antibiotic is targeting a specific function or a specific organelle or a specific marker in the bacteria to bind to, and this bacteria is disabled, it doesn't have this function or this marker, so it doesn't get it. But this bacteria is a degraded bacteria, is a disabled bacteria, is a defective bacteria. And it is only flourishing because the deaf cannot be hypnotized, or the blind cannot be hypnotized, or the illiterate cannot be hypnotized. And this kind of propaganda by the evolutionary theory is astonishing and amazing to me in terms of scientific honesty, in terms of integrity. Because this information that we are discussing now is not a secret to any of the scientists. Evolutionary scientists who have masters and PhDs and doing postdocs, etc. They know biology, and they know molecular biology, and they know immunology, and they know biochemistry very well. And they know that those are the effects at play. So, why? Whenever you are talking, we ask somebody about evolution, or there is a heated debate. I go into so many debates. I reply to hundreds of messages in any week, due to the videos and the comments about them over YouTube or Facebook, etc. And almost every other day, somebody says, how come you are denying evolution and we have antibiotic resistance? And he is saying this because somebody told him. Because there are all of those videos, all of those documentaries, all of those science explainers, all of those magazine articles that are talking about antibiotic resistance as evidence for evolution. It is evolution in terms of it is an adaptive response. But this is not what they are using it to prove. Because it's obviously an adaptive response. The question is this descent with modification through random mutations and natural selection or not? And the answer is it's not. There is no random thing happening here. There is either existing machinery that it's taken out of the toolbox, or there is different skills expressed in terms of genetic material being exchanged and expressed, or disabled bacteria. And none of this is random mutations being filtered through natural selection. There is no innovative aspect of randomness, and there is no filtering of this randomness to provide an advantage. So this specific example of the bacteria antibiotic resistance teaches us a few lessons. Number one, when you hear a new claim for the evolutionary theory,
take it with a grain of salt.
Yes, take it with plenty of salt. Hold your horses. Because at the end, reason and logic will prevail. The fact that we do not have the explanation to what this is happening because we did not do enough research yet does not mean immediately that evolution. Because this is what it is. It's like evolution of the gaps. You know, evolution say, okay, you don't know the result. It is the reason. It is God. It's God of the gaps. No. What's happening in this theory is that this is evolution of the gaps. Whenever there's a gap, the answer is evolution. And they ask you to say or to prove otherwise. No, guys, this is not how it works. You need to prove whenever you put on the table a claim that is against logic and reason, you need to come with the evidence that this prove to me that this is a random mutation. And then show me that this mutation happened randomly, and then show me that it was selected. And that this mutation is an advantage, not a circumstantial advantage because of a disability, for example. Because if it is a disability, it will not explain the gradient of complexity and the gradient of functionality that exists in nature. So this is number one. Number two, and unfortunately I have to say this, there is a great amount of dishonesty
in the scientific community.
In the scientific community, whenever you are in this field of evolutionary biology, and unfortunately even in cosmology and astronomy, where those are the two major disciplines where you have existential questions being answered. Okay? Huge amount. Unfortunately, it's a very miserable.
It's a very unscientific.
It's a very unscientific and unethical way.
It's almost like the herd mentality because
Yes.
If you don't follow the herd, you get kicked out. So there's a lot of pressure on people to.
Absolutely, and this is actually the third point, which is this thing that everybody tells you. Who are you to challenge evolutionary theory? 97, they changed this. 97% of the scientists are confirming pro-evolution. 98, 99. When they throw these numbers at you, you say, how come? All of those scientists, are they all illiterate? Are they all uneducated? Are they all missing the point? And all those creationists are the smart ones? And unfortunately, it is not like that. Unfortunately, what is happening is playing with words, linguistic tricks, dishonest representations of what is evolution, and hence relating the observations to conclusions, and a state of deception to the general public, using a horrific media machine.
It just comes to my mind now that, which is kind of ironic, that because of this herd mentality and the sort of the protective type of mechanism that's happened to protect the evolution theory, it almost has to be someone from outside the scientific community, so to speak, that actually speaks up against it, because someone like that, someone like you, who's not counted, who's not considered to be one of them, like inside the scientific community, so to speak, doesn't have the same stress or fear of losing something by speaking out against what the majority. Do you get my point?
Yes, actually.
It's like you don't care. You don't care what they think of you.
Absolutely.
And they can't kick you out of anything because you're not part of the club.
I'm not part of the evolutionary biology club.
Yeah.
Yes, and you have a great point. So some people in many discussions come and say this. Show me how many evolutionary biologists... show me how many biologists is against evolution. And the immediate answer is, if the only way to study biology is through studying evolutionary biology as a foundational concept, you cannot become a biologist unless you go into your exams and you fill your answers and you get your accreditation from people who are already evolutionary biologists.
You're indoctrinated before you even start.
You are indoctrinated, and if you don't like it, and if you express that you don't like,
you're not going to become a biologist.
You're not going to go anywhere.
Yeah.
So yes, you are right. It is almost a mandate